probably think vampire stories belong in horror movies or teenage romance novels. But picture this: 18th century Europe, a small village in Serbia. People aren't gathering to mourn, but to dig up a grave. Why? Because they believe the man buried there is still walking among them, drinking blood and killing their neighbors. The only way to stop him? A wooden stake through the heart, burn the body, and hope it works. Sounds like a scene from Dracula, right? But this isn't fiction. It happened. Multiple times. In real life. Welcome to the world of real historical vampire hunts. It starts in 1725. A man named Petar Blagojevich dies, and at first, everything seems normal. But 8 days after his burial, something strange begins. 9 people from the same village mysteriously die. Some of them claim they saw Petar at night, cold, pale, and hungry. The village erupts in panic. The locals decide to dig up Petar's grave. What do they find? The body seems oddly fresh. His mouth has traces of blood, and his nails appear longer than they should be. The villagers believe this is proof. Petar has come back as a vampire. They stake him through the heart and burn the body. This isn't folklore. Austrian officials documented the event. Yes, a government report on real vampire activity. Welcome to Europe in the Age of Enlightenment. So why did the villagers believe in vampires? Back in the 1700s, people had no knowledge of germs or the process of decomposition. They didn't know why someone might look unusually fresh after death. In fact, bodies sometimes appeared bloated or unnaturally preserved due to gaseous buildup during decomposition. To the villagers, these signs weren't just odd. They were terrifying, and they meant something supernatural had taken place. Without the understanding of disease or how illness spreads, when someone died and others started dying soon after, it was logical to blame the first corpse. Death was random and terrifying in an era of plague and famine. And with no modern medical knowledge, the only explanation seemed to be the supernatural. Fast forward to 1732, and we meet Arnold Pauli, a Serbian soldier who dies after claiming he had been attacked by a vampire during the war. Soon after, people in his village begin dying under strange circumstances. As it turns out, they report seeing Arnold at night, alive and pale. Naturally, the villagers exhumed Arnold's body. They found it bloated and unusually well preserved, with blood around his mouth. They believed he had returned from the grave as a vampire. Once again, the body was staked and burned, and word quickly spread. But things didn't stop there. Villagers began digging up other graves just to be safe, and the panic escalated. Dozens of bodies were exhumed, staked, and burned across the region. The Austrian authorities were forced to investigate, leading to an official military report on the matter. It wasn't just folklore anymore, it was state-sponsored research into vampires. What happened in Serbia wasn't isolated. Vampire panic spread across Europe, from Poland to Hungary, Germany, and even France. It was a widespread phenomenon. Entire graveyards were desecrated. Bodies were dug up, staked, and burned in mass hysteria. The fear wasn't just localized to peasants. Even intellectuals began to take the vampire phenomenon seriously. One notable figure, Dom Augustin Calmet, a French monk, wrote about the vampire phenomenon in the 18th century. He didn't dismiss it as superstition. He considered it seriously, analyzing it as part of the cultural belief system of the time. This wasn't fringe thinking, it was a mainstream fear, fueled by the mysterious and terrifying diseases that plagued Europe. Why were vampires the focus of such hysteria? The truth is, vampires weren't seen as the sexy, immortal beings we know today. In fact, they were decaying corpses that spread death and disease. In the 1700s, Europe was ravaged by outbreaks of the bubonic plague and other deadly diseases. People had no understanding of germs, viruses, or bacteria. So when a disease would strike, it often wiped out entire villages. Naturally, the first dead body was blamed for the spread of illness. In deeply Christian Europe, the idea of a corpse returning from the grave was a violation of God's natural order. Vampires represented a defiance of life and death, a blasphemous resurrection that seemed to challenge the very fabric of reality. They weren't just monsters, they were symbols of moral decay. The vampire hysteria wasn't confined to one village or one country. Poland, Germany, and even England saw the panic spread. Entire graveyards were desecrated. People believed vampires were not just creatures of folklore. They were real threats, responsible for the deaths of countless people. By the 1730s, the Austrian authorities had to step in. Military investigations into vampire activity were conducted, and official reports were published detailing the strange events. Even the intellectual elites were fascinated by the phenomenon. These were not fringe beliefs, but a mainstream cultural panic that spread like wildfire across Europe. So why did people believe in vampires? It wasn't just superstition. The vampire panic was born out of fear of the unknown. When disease and death were unpredictable, the idea of a supernatural cause made sense. Vampires offered a way to explain the chaos. In a world where plague, famine, and unexplained illnesses were common, the supernatural seemed like the only logical explanation. Moreover, vampire hunts became a coping mechanism for communities. When people couldn't understand the reasons for sudden death, they turned to a supernatural explanation. Staking bodies and burning them was a way to regain some sense of control. It was a ritual to fight back against the chaos of death. It wasn't about hunting monsters. It was about grappling with loss in a time of uncertainty. So here's the big question. Are we still doing this today? Not with vampires, of course, but we still look for scapegoats when something goes wrong. Think about the rise of conspiracy theories, or how quickly people turn on political enemies during times of crisis. The impulse is the same. We still need something to blame. In many ways, the hunt for vampires in 18th century Europe mirrors how we act today when faced with the unknown. We may no longer stake corpses, but we still look for something or someone to explain the chaos around us. We don't need garlic or wooden stakes. We turn to scapegoats and magical thinking. The world feels out of control, and we still want to make sense of it. In the end, the vampire hunts weren't about vampires at all. They were about fear. Fear of disease, fear of death, and fear of a world that didn't make sense. The people involved weren't seeking monsters. They were seeking answers. They were trying to make sense of a world that was out of control. Vampires were a way to explain the chaos, a way to regain control over death and disease. So the next time you hear about a creepy vampire story, remember, it might not be too far from the truth. The real horror wasn't in the vampires, it was in the fear. Fear makes us do irrational things. It makes us create monsters out of things we don't understand. And that's the true terror of the vampire hunts.